So that's South Korea. Hong Kong, which we had not previously talked about, but also took a very proactive stance early on, as did Taiwan. So I'm going to add their numbers to us. So the prevalence number for Hong Kong is 1.4 people have COVID-19 for every 10,000 people in the population, right? And it's 0.18 in Taiwan, right? So for every 10,000 people in Taiwan, there's not even one person who has COVID-19, right? And you would need 2 million residents of Hong Kong or 4 million residents of Taiwan to find one person who's died of COVID-19. I'm going to add that on here. Our 2 million and 4 million. Okay, so let's look at Singapore. So Singapore, as we know from what we talked about earlier, instituted very similar policies to South Korea. And initially they were really being hailed for having kept their rates of infection low. But they didn't extend the strategy to include migrant workers who were living in overcrowded dormitories. And there's since been an outbreak of cases among those workers, which has led Singapore to have a surge to 19,410 confirmed cases and 18 deaths. So Singapore has an overall prevalence of 34 cases of COVID-19 per 10,000 people in the population. But the number of deaths is still pretty low, so you'd need to pick out 300,000 people from Singapore to find one person who's died from COVID-19. Okay, so again, I'm keeping track here, but what we're seeing as a general pattern is that in South Korea, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, countries that extended these massive testing, contact tracing, and selective quarantine policies to everybody in the population, prevalence is pretty low, and deaths aren't that common, right? Especially in Taiwan and Hong Kong. Okay, so let's move to group 2. These are the countries that instituted lockdowns early on in the course of the pandemic to prevent community transition, right? And now they're starting to talk about reopening using the strategy of massive testing, contact tracing, and selective quarantine, right? So this was our New Zealand, Australia, and Argentina group. So in New Zealand, as of yesterday, there were 1,486 confirmed cases and 20 deaths. New Zealand has an overall prevalence of about 3 cases of coronavirus per 10,000 people. And you'd have to pick out 200,000 people in New Zealand to find one person who's died of COVID-19. Right? Australia has 6,849 confirmed cases and 96 deaths. Remember, they went to lockdown later than New Zealand did. And this gives them an overall prevalence, still pretty low, of 2.7. Remember, Australia has a much larger population than New Zealand does. And you need to pick out about 300,000 people in Australia to find one person who's died. In Argentina, we're seeing 4,874 confirmed cases and 260 deaths for a prevalence of just over 1 per 10,000 people. You'd need 200,000 Argentinians to find one COVID-related death. And so that means that the death rate seems to be a little bit higher in Argentina, or maybe they're, which might have to do with the age of the population, right? So now for our final, and so again, let me just put up our little leaderboard here. Hopefully you can see this. Let's see. Let me try to get that on the screen. Okay. So overall, we're seeing fairly low prevalence rates in the single digits here, with the exception of Singapore, right? Really is our standout different case. So let's move to group 3. These are our herd immunity folks, right? So Sweden yesterday reported 23,216 cases and 2,854 deaths. Divided by their population, this gives us a prevalence of 22.6 cases of COVID per 10,000 people in the population. And you would need to gather together 3,700 Swedes to find one person who had died of coronavirus. Make sure this is dark enough on here that you'll be able to see it. Okay. In the Netherlands, we're looking at 41,087 cases and 5,168 deaths for a prevalence of 23.7, right? You would need to survey about 3,400 Dutch people to find one COVID death. The UK, which started with a herd immunity strategy and then changed course shortly before Prime Minister Boris Johnson was himself diagnosed with COVID, is reporting 195,000 cases and 29,427 deaths as of yesterday. So the prevalence there is 29.26. And you need about 2,720 Brits to find one COVID-related death. And for those wondering, here in the US, where lockdown was ordered but not until quite late, we are reporting 1.23 million COVID confirmed cases and 71,532 deaths as of yesterday, giving us a prevalence of 37.5. You need just over 4,000 Americans to find a COVID death. Now, these are very crude calculations, and like I said before, they don't account for things like population density, how long the pandemic has been going in each country, and how well people comply with lockdown orders or things like that, right? And we need to capture data on those things and make adjustments for them to know whether it's really these different strategies or actually something else causing these differences. But I'm going to put up our leaderboard here again. Let me try to get this centered in the screen and make sure you can see all of these numbers. Again, green, the higher the number, the worse things are, and the black numbers, the higher they are, the better things are. So, sorry, let me say that more clearly. The higher the green number is, and the lower the black number is, the worse things are. So, when I personally see these numbers, knowing that these are very, very crude calculations, that they have been done quickly and not with the proper care that we would normally take in doing these types of calculations, I am left wondering, looking at the numbers and how similar they are for groups 1 and 2 that acted very swiftly, albeit with different strategies, and this third group. I am left wondering if maybe it really is the quick, decisive action of leaders in the groups 1 and 2 countries that's making this difference, right? And I look at Singapore down here, that exception, right? And I'm inclined to think of it as a cautionary tale of what happens if we leave some people in our society behind. So if you're as interested in this stuff as I am, there's an amazing resource being developed by Oxford University called the Coronavirus Government Response Tracker that's compiling detailed information about what governments are doing so that researchers can do those careful comparisons and give us more certainty about the effects of these policies, right? And so the data that they're compiling will be available for researchers to actually use and do these calculations in the proper kind of way that take account for the length of duration, differences in the underlying population structure, how healthy people are, all those kinds of things, right, in the future, so that we have kind of a better, more robust way of actually making these comparisons. And give us more certainty about, whether these policies are having the effect that it looks like from looking at these very, very crude basic numbers. So I know that has been a long video today. Thank you for sticking with it. I just wanted to let you know that coronavirus is going to go on a little hiatus for the rest of this week, in part because, oh my gosh, can you imagine listening to me talk at you anymore? But also because I'm going to be in an all-day workshop learning some new statistical modeling techniques for the rest of the week. Super nerdy, I know, but don't worry, I'm not going to start doing coronavirus modeling or anything else. This is for totally different stuff. And I am leaving the coronavirus modeling to the experts. So when we come back next week, I'm hoping that I'll have had time to kind of track, and I and the team will have had time to track down more information about remdesivir. It's been in the news a lot. People have a lot of questions. So hopefully we'll be able to answer some of your questions about that new experimental treatment. But as always, if there are other questions you want answered, other things that have come up that you wish we would talk about here in CoronaChat, drop them in the comments, and we'll see what we can find out. You're also, feel free to direct message me too. That works as well. In the meantime, have a good week. Stay safe out there. Take care of each other. Remember, we're all in this together. And I'll see you all back next week.